In the quiet mountain town of Cedar Ridge, a storm had barely passed when Officer Nate Caldwell and his German Shepherd Titan received a call that would change their lives forever. A child's cry cut through the rain, leading them to a home drowning in silence and sorrow. What they found that night was more than a rescue. It was the beginning of a bond that would heal wounds deeper than the storm itself. Through loyalty, courage, and a love that asks for nothing in return, Titan became more than a hero. He became hope. Watch now and discover how one German Shepherd reminded a town what true light looks like. The storm had eased, but the wind still scraped against the windows of Cedar Ridge. Snow clung to the edges of the narrow streets, melting into gray water that glimmered under the pale light of street lamps. The small mountain town lay quiet, wrapped in the silence that follows a long night of wind. Officer Nate Caldwell stepped out from the patrol SUV, his boots sinking into the slush. The air bit through his gloves, sharp and clean. Beside him, the German Shepherd named Titan moved with steady purpose. His coat, a mix of black and tan, glistened with droplets that slid down like glass beads. Titan's breath rose in faint white clouds as he paused to scan the street. For a moment, the two stood in stillness, the man and his partner bound by years of shared duty. Caldwell adjusted his collar and looked at Titan with quiet pride. In the stillness, they understood each other without a word. Titan shifted his stance slightly, ears forward, eyes calm. He had learned the rhythm of his handler's movements long ago, just as Caldwell had learned the quiet signals in the dog's gaze. The patrol lights turned slowly, washing the snowbanks in soft red and blue. Beyond the street, the mountains loomed dark, their outlines carved against a low gray sky. A lone chimney sent smoke into the wind, carrying the scent of pine wood. The town was small, 1,500 people, a few streets, a diner that closed early, and a gas station that never slept. Life moved at the pace of weather here. Caldwell's radio crackled to life, breaking the hush. The voice of dispatch carried a note of concern. Unit 7, we've got a report of a child crying in the north residential area. Repeated calls from neighbors, possible welfare concern. Caldwell turned toward the SUV, his expression tightening. Titan lifted his head, alert, as if understanding every word. The officer pressed the radio to his shoulder. Copy that, en route. He slid into the driver's seat. Titan leapt into the back compartment, landing with practiced ease. The heater hummed, filling the cabin with dry warmth. Outside, the wind rattled the loose metal of a signpost and snow drifted lazily across the headlights. As the vehicle rolled through the quiet streets, Caldwell glanced at Titan in the mirror. The dog sat upright, eyes steady on the road ahead. There had been nights like this before, nights when the storm hid more than snow. Titan had a sense for such moments. His ears twitched at faint sounds that the radio missed his focus, unwavering. Cedar Ridge stretched ahead, rows of modest houses dim behind curtains. The storm had left everything washed clean, yet something in the air felt unsettled, like a note of sorrow that lingered after a song. Caldwell's fingers tightened on the wheel. Somewhere out there, a child was crying through the cold. He reached for the siren switch, hesitated for a heartbeat, then turned it off. The night was too quiet for noise. Some rescues began in silence. Titan shifted slightly, his gaze following the glow of the northern street. Caldwell nodded once, as if to confirm the thought both had shared. The SUV turned onto the next road, tires crunching over ice. Ahead, a single porch light flickered in the storm's aftermath, and somewhere beyond that faint glow, a sound waited, soft, distant, and heartbreaking. At the edge of Cedar Ridge, where the road bent toward the forest, an old house leaned against the wind. Its paint had faded to a tired shade of blue, and the porch sagged under the weight of years. The gutters hung loose, still dripping from the storm, and the windows held the dull reflection of a single flickering bulb inside. It looked like a place that had once been loved, but had long stopped expecting company. Inside, the air was cold enough to miss a breath. The heater had gone quiet hours ago. A few embers glowed faintly in the fireplace, their light flickering against peeling wallpaper. In the corner of the small living room, a boy sat curled on a threadbare rug, knees drawn to his chest. His name was Emmett Lowe. He was 5 years old, thin for his age, with hair the color of chestnut bark and eyes too large for his small face. In his hands he held a flannel shirt, soft from age and wear. It belonged to his father, Julian Lowe, who had once fixed engines in a shop downtown. The shirt still carried a faint scent of oil and cedar. A trace of the man Emmett remembered in flashes, a laugh that filled the house, a hand that could lift him high enough to touch the ceiling fan. That warmth had vanished. The winter Julian's lungs gave out, leaving silence in its place. Emmett pressed the shirt to his face. The fabric was rough, but it was all he had left. "Daddy, please come back," he whispered. His voice was small, almost lost beneath the steady drip of water outside. He waited, as if the house might answer. Only the wind moved, brushing the window pane with a sigh. From the kitchen came the faint sound of dishes, the scrape of a chair against tile. Kara Whitlow, his stepmother, moved through the dim light. Tall and sharp-shouldered, she carried a tired impatience that filled every corner. She had once smiled for neighbors and brought casseroles to church events, but grief had hardened her voice. She wore it now like armor. The house seemed to echo that change, its walls dull, its warmth gone. Emmett's stomach growled softly. He didn't call for her. He had learned that quiet was safer. The wind pressed harder against the walls and the floor creaked under each gust. The boy shifted closer to the fireplace, clutching the flannel tighter. Outside, the storm had thinned to a drizzle, but the clouds still hung low over the ridge. Water slid down the porch steps, gathering in the dirt below. The yard was scattered with forgotten toys, their colors muted by mud and frost. Through the thin glass of the window, the world looked distant, like a picture seen through fog. Emmett stared at it until his vision blurred. His lips moved again, forming a sound softer than breath. "Please, Daddy. Just once more." The house gave no reply. Only the sound of wind, steady and hollow, filled the space. It wrapped around the boy like a whisper that had lost its voice. In that fragile silence, something shifted. The sound of footsteps, heavier now, moving from the kitchen. A shadow crossed the hallway, growing larger against the wall. Kara's voice came sharp and strained. "Emmett, what are you doing still awake?" The boy flinched, his fingers tightening on the shirt. The wind rattled the door, and a loose shutter slammed against the siding. Outside, far down the street, the faint hum of a patrol engine moved closer through the rain. The wind pressed harder against the windows as Kara stepped into the living room. The dim light from the lamp caught the sharp lines of her face. Her jaw was tight, and her hands were still damp from washing dishes. The towel twisted between her fingers. "I told you to go to bed," she said, her tone low but rising with each word. Emmett's small frame seemed to shrink into the rug. He didn't answer. The flannel shirt was still clutched against his chest, the faint smell of oil and cedar filling the space between them. Kara's eyes fell on it. "That old thing again." Her voice cracked into something sharper. "Do you think crying will bring him back?" Emmett's lips parted, but the words caught in his throat. His eyes glistened. He shook his head slightly, though he didn't understand what answer might calm her. Kara's breath came fast. Weeks of sleepless nights, unpaid bills, and whispered judgment from neighbors had built inside her like a slow fire. She saw the boy's silence not as sadness, but as defiance. "Stop pretending, Emmett. You want people to feel sorry for you, don't you?" The boy's fingers gripped the fabric tighter. "I just miss him," he said softly. The towel slipped from her hands. The sound of rain outside grew louder, a rhythm that matched her pulse. "Enough," she said through clenched teeth. "You need to learn to stop this nonsense." She grabbed his wrist and pulled him to his feet. The sudden motion sent the flannel slipping from his hands, landing in the ash near the fireplace. Emmett reached for it, but her grip tightened. "Let go," he cried. Kara dragged him toward the door. The latch rattled as she forced it open and cold rain spilled inside, soaking the floor. The wind whipped through the house, scattering papers and dust. Emmett stumbled, his small feet slipping on the wet boards. "Kara, please." His voice broke into a sob, but she didn't stop. They stepped onto the porch, the rain stinging their faces. The yard had turned into a swamp of mud and puddles, glinting under the weak porch light. Her words came out in a trembling rush. "You think the world will pity you, Emmett? Is that it?" The boy's breath came in short, panicked gasps. His eyes darted toward the street where faint lights flickered through the rain. He tried to pull away. "I'll be quiet, I promise," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Kara's hand shook as she pushed him forward. "You never stop," she said. "You never stop crying." Emmett stumbled down the steps, his shoes sinking into the mud. Then, with a sharp motion, Kara shoved him hard. He fell into the shallow ditch beside the yard. Water splashed high, mixing with the sound of rain. His small cry cut through the air, thin and raw. For a moment, the only sounds were rain and the low moan of wind. Then a neighbor's voice called out from across the street. Curtains moved and a figure appeared on a porch, eyes wide with shock. "Kara." "What are you doing?" Another voice followed. "Somebody call the police." Kara froze, the reality of what she'd done flickering across her face. Emmett lay in the ditch, trembling, covered in mud. The rain beat down in steady sheets, washing streaks across his cheeks. Down the road, a faint beam of light broke through the mist. A patrol SUV moving closer. The reflection of its headlights glimmered in the puddles like small stars. Kara turned toward the sound, her pulse quickening. Emmett tried to push himself up, his hands slipping in the mud. His voice came again, small and broken. "Daddy." The rain swallowed the word. The patrol SUV turned the corner, its headlights cutting through sheets of rain. Red and blue lights flashed across the narrow street, slicing through the mist like blades of color. The engine's hum rose above the wind as Officer Nate Caldwell brought the vehicle to a stop near the ditch. Through the windshield, he saw a small shape in the mud, a child motionless for a moment, then shifting weakly. A woman stood a few steps away, frozen in the glow of the headlights. Her hands hung stiff at her sides, eyes wide, rain streaking down her pale face. Caldwell's body moved before thought. He reached for the latch on his vest, switching on his body camera. A faint chime confirmed it was recording. Titan stirred in the back compartment, his amber eyes, alert muscles coiled and ready. Caldwell opened the door and stepped into the rain. "Ma'am," he called, voice calm but firm. "Step back from the child." Kara blinked, her lips parting as if to protest, but no sound came. The storm swallowed her words. Caldwell lifted a hand, signaling toward the rear of the SUV. "Titan, come." The German Shepherd leapt down, landing softly despite the wet ground. Rain rolled off his coat as he moved forward, low and steady, forming a line between the officer and the woman. His body angled just enough to block her path. His gaze fixed on her every motion, ears tilted forward, a deep rumble in his chest. A warning drawn from instinct and training. Kara took an uncertain step back. Her voice cracked. "He fell," she stammered. "I didn't mean—" Caldwell's tone remained measured. "Stay where you are." He glanced once at Titan, then stepped toward the ditch. The beam from his flashlight caught the boy's face, mud-streaked, trembling eyes wide with shock. The child's small fingers clutched at the soaked flannel shirt, half buried in the sludge. Caldwell knelt in the mud, one knee sinking as water soaked through his pants. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "You're all right. You're safe now." The boy shivered, too cold to speak. Caldwell slid his arms beneath the small frame, lifting him carefully. Mud and water dripped from the child's clothes, the fabric heavy against the officer's jacket. Titan stepped closer, his gaze softening as he sniffed the air, confirming no immediate threat. Caldwell carried the boy to the SUV, his boots splashing through puddles. He reached into the back seat for a thermal blanket, wrapping it snugly around the child. "You'll warm up soon," he said quietly. "We've got you." Behind them, Titan remained alert, watching Kara from a steady crouch. The red light from Caldwell's body camera blinked through the downpour, catching the shimmer of rain as it fell. Each frame captured the moment. The woman's shock, the officer's calm focus, the dog standing between fear and safety. Caldwell turned toward the SUV, once more motioning to Titan. "Let's go." The German Shepherd trotted beside him, muscles flexing with each step. Together they climbed back into the warmth of the vehicle. As the heater roared to life, steam rose from their soaked uniforms. The boy's eyes fluttered open, meeting Caldwell's for the first time. In that brief look, something fragile passed between them, trust faint but real. Titan lay down at the boy's feet, his breathing steady, his body a silent wall of warmth. Caldwell adjusted the radio. Dispatch welfare check confirmed. Child located and secured. Transporting to station for evaluation. Outside, the storm began to fade. The flashing lights painted the wet street in streaks of blue and red. Through the rain-streaked window, the small town slept, unaware that a quiet act of courage had just rewritten the night. The Cedar Ridge police station glowed faintly against the damp night. The rain had slowed to a whisper, leaving a sheen across the pavement that caught the reflection of street lamps. Inside, the air was dry and warm, filled with the low hum of fluorescent lights. Officer Nate Caldwell pushed open the door and stepped into the lobby, the child still wrapped in the thick patrol blanket. The smell of wet wool and cold air followed them in. Titan padded beside him, his paws leaving dark prints on the tile. The front desk clerk, a middle-aged woman with glasses slipping down her nose, looked up from her paperwork. Her eyes widened at the sight. "Oh, dear Lord. Is he hurt?" "Cold and shaken," Caldwell replied. "We'll get a nurse to check him." The woman nodded and hurried toward the back room. Caldwell carried the boy into a small interview room meant for sensitive cases. It was brighter than it needed to be. Walls painted pale yellow, the corners softened by a shelf of plush toys meant to comfort children who came through its door. Caldwell set the boy gently on a padded chair. "You're safe here," he said. "My name's Nate. That's Titan." Emmett didn't answer. His hands clutched the edge of the blanket, knuckles white. Mud still streaked his cheeks, and his lips trembled from the chill that lingered in his bones. Titan settled close, lying down at the boy's side. His breathing filled the room with quiet steadiness. When the boy shivered, Titan inched closer until his fur brushed against Emmett's leg. The small gesture broke the distance between them. The boy's hand hesitated, then rested on the dog's head. Titan's tail moved, once a soft thump against the floor. Caldwell crouched to unfasten the soaked jacket from the boy's shoulders. As he folded it aside, he noticed a faint glimmer of metal in the lining of Emmett's shirt. A small bronze charm had been sewn into the fabric near the collar, almost hidden by the seam. He eased it free, careful not to startle the child. The charm was worn smooth, with age shaped like a small disc. Faint letters curved along its edge. Caldwell held it to the light and read the engraving aloud under his breath. "If you lose your way, find the one who carries the light." He frowned slightly, tracing the words with his thumb. Something about the phrase lingered in his mind. He looked up at the boy, who watched him with wary eyes. "Did your father give you this?" he asked softly. Emmett's voice was barely a whisper. "It was in his shirt." Caldwell nodded once and returned the charm to its place, tucking the fabric back gently. He saw how the boy's small fingers pressed the bronze piece against his heart, as if it might still connect him to the man he had lost. Titan shifted his head, resting it across the boy's knees. The steady rise and fall of his breath seemed to calm the air itself. For the first time, Emmett's shoulders eased. Caldwell watched them for a moment. The boy wrapped in a blanket, the dog keeping silent vigil. The storm outside had ended, yet something new had begun, a quiet current running between them. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. In that shared silence, under the pale hum of neon light, 3 lives had intersected. 1 man, 1 child, and 1 faithful creature, drawn together by chance and perhaps by something greater. Morning came gray and cold. The storm had passed, but Cedar Ridge carried its weight in silence. Puddles glittered along the street outside the police station, and the mountains beyond were veiled in mist. Inside, the smell of coffee and damp uniforms hung in the air. Officer Nate Caldwell sat at a long wooden table in the report room, typing his statement. Each click of the keys felt heavier than the last. Across the desk lay the flannel shirt, cleaned and folded, and a small evidence bag containing the bronze charm. Titan rested near the doorway, head between his paws, watching the hallway where voices rose and fell. Emmett had been transferred to the County Child Services Center hours earlier. Caldwell had watched the car pull away, the boy's pale face barely visible through the window. The image stayed with him. The door opened and Sergeant Hale stepped in, his expression tight. "Caldwell, you'll want to see this," he said, setting a folder on the desk. Inside were photographs. Kara Whitlow, damp hair pulled back, eyes red but defiant. She sat in the interview room earlier that morning, her hands folded neatly, her story rehearsed. "She's saying it was an accident," Hale continued. "Claims the boy slipped in the rain. Neighbors misread the scene." Caldwell leaned back in his chair, jaw set. "We both know she shoved him." Hale nodded but didn't meet his eyes. Body cam footage would settle it. Except, he hesitated. The storm knocked out half the department's data feed. That lightning strike last night hit the relay. Your camera files corrupted. The words hit harder than expected. Caldwell reached for the small black device sitting on the desk. Its red light had blinked through the rain, capturing every second, or so he thought. Now the screen flickered blank. "You're telling me it's gone? Tech team's trying to recover it," Hale said. "But right now we don't have proof strong enough to charge her. Just statements and what we saw after the fact." Caldwell stared at the frozen image of the storm outside the window. "And the witnesses, some are sure," Hale said. "Others say it was too dark too fast. People talk, then second guess. You know how it goes." Cedar Ridge was small, a place where everyone knew everyone. Rumors traveled faster than patrol cars. By noon, half the town whispered that the officer had overreacted, that maybe the stepmother wasn't cruel, that maybe the boy had tripped. The other half believed the opposite, that justice would be buried under paperwork. Caldwell left the office to clear his head. The corridors smelled faintly of rain-soaked paper. Titan followed close, his paws silent against the tile. In the break room, the television played a local report. Police investigate domestic dispute in Cedar Ridge. Sources describe conflicting accounts. He turned it off. The silence that followed pressed against him harder than any storm. Titan shifted beside him, tail brushing the floor. The dog's eyes lifted to meet his, steady and certain. Caldwell rested a hand on the thick fur behind his neck. "We saw it," he murmured. "We know what happened." The German shepherd gave a slow exhale as if sharing the weight. Outside, the clouds began to gather again, the light thinning to gray. Doubt had entered the town like the return of cold wind, quiet, unseen, and hard to shake. 2 days passed under a sky the color of steel. The air in Cedar Ridge felt still, as if the storm had left something unfinished. Officer Nate Caldwell stood beside his patrol SUV in the back lot of the station, Titan waiting at his side. The investigation had stalled. Kara's statement held, the witnesses wavered, and the missing body cam file cast a long shadow over everything. Caldwell leaned against the open driver's door, reviewing paperwork he didn't believe in. Titan paced near the vehicles, nose low to the ground. The dog paused by the rear of an old gray sedan parked against the fence. Its plates matched Kara Whitlow's car. Titan sniffed again, his focus tightening, his tail stiffened, ears angling forward. "What is it?" Caldwell asked. He set the clipboard aside and followed. Titan circled to the trunk, then sat sharply, his gaze fixed. Caldwell unlocked it with the station's evidence tag key. Inside, the light caught a mess of rain-soaked blankets, a pair of boots, and a glove half buried beneath them. The fabric was streaked with brown, darkened by dried mud. Caldwell crouched and lifted it carefully with a gloved hand. It was a woman's glove, thin leather torn along the cuff. Mud clung thick around the fingertips. "Good boy," he murmured. Titan stood alert, tail giving one slow sweep. Inside the glove, Caldwell saw faint traces of something darker than soil. He sealed it in a plastic bag, marking it with a tag for the lab. His chest tightened. "If this holds the boy's DNA," he said softly, "it's over." Titan gave a quiet rumble, not a warning, but a sound like acknowledgement. The dog's amber eyes caught the light, reflecting calm certainty. That evening, Caldwell submitted the evidence to the state lab in Jackson. The technician promised results within 48 hours. When he left the building, the sun had already dipped behind the mountains, leaving a thin red glow along the horizon. At the same hour, miles away, Emmett lay in a small cot at the County Child Services Center. The room was plain. White walls, soft nightlight. A blanket that smelled faintly of detergent. Sleep didn't come easily. Each time he drifted off, the sound of rain returned, followed by the echo of a voice calling his name. He woke with a start, heart pounding, eyes wide in the dark. The door opened quietly. Caldwell stepped in with Titan at his heel. The visit had been cleared through the caseworker, who believed the boy might rest easier with a familiar presence. Emmett sat up, clutching the edge of his blanket. Titan approached slowly, his steps soft on the linoleum. The German Shepherd rested his head on the edge of the bed, warm breath brushing against Emmett's arm. The boy's small hand reached out, touching the dog's muzzle. "You came back," he whispered. Titan's tail moved once, a quiet answer. The tension in Emmett's shoulders eased. Caldwell stood by the doorway, watching the exchange. The night outside was still, but something inside the room had shifted. The trembling quiet replaced by a fragile calm. Within minutes, Emmett's breathing steadied. His fingers stayed tangled in Titan's fur as sleep finally found him. Caldwell lingered a while longer, then nodded to the dog. "Good work," he said softly. As he stepped out into the hallway, the caseworker approached. "How's the evidence?" she asked. "We'll know soon," Caldwell replied. His voice was steady, but beneath it ran a quiet hope. In the dim corridor, Titan walked beside him, silent and sure. The truth was close now, buried once but waiting to rise again. The courthouse in Jackson stood pale against the mountain sky, its stone steps slick from melting snow. Inside, the air carried the smell of paper coffee and old wood polish. The hearing room was small, its benches filled with murmuring townspeople who had come to witness what they called the Cedar Ridge case. Officer Nate Caldwell sat near the front, his uniform pressed but damp at the cuffs from the drive. Titan waited outside with a handler leashed, but restless pacing in slow circles under the covered entry. At the defense table, Kara Whitlow sat beside her attorney Clifford Brandt, a man with silver hair, a smooth voice, and eyes that missed nothing. Kara's face was pale, framed by hair tied too neatly, her expression one of practiced sorrow. The judge called the session to order. The chatter faded. Brandt rose first, his voice even. "Your Honor, this is a case clouded by assumption and emotion. My client has been publicly vilified for what appears by every objective measure to be a tragic accident. There is no verified footage, no conclusive physical evidence." He paused, glancing toward Caldwell. "And what we do have," he continued, "are statements colored by personal involvement, by an officer whose history with child welfare cases may compromise his objectivity." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Caldwell's jaw tightened, but he stayed still. He had expected this. The prosecutor, a younger woman named Dawson, countered with calm precision. "Witnesses observed the defendant pushing the child. The officer's account is consistent with their statements. The absence of body cam footage does not erase what occurred." Brandt stepped closer to the bench. Yet that absence is precisely the problem. Technology fails, and in that failure we are asked to take a man's word on faith. Officer Caldwell arrived in a storm, acted under stress, and his version conveniently fits the narrative. The judge's gaze shifted to Caldwell. "Officer, do you wish to respond?" Caldwell stood, his voice measured. My report reflects what I saw. I responded to a call about a crying child. I witnessed physical distress and heard the boy's statement. Brandt interrupted smoothly. And the recording? It was damaged during the storm, Caldwell said. Brandt's brow lifted. How unfortunate. The words carried a chill sharper than the mountain wind outside. When the session adjourned, the ruling was brief but heavy. The investigation would continue, but pending review, Caldwell was placed on administrative leave. Titan, as his assigned partner, would be removed from active duty until further notice. Caldwell left the building to find the dog waiting by the steps, leash looped through the handler's hand. Titan's ears pricked at his approach, tail lifting once before dropping again at the officer's expression. Orders, Caldwell said quietly, kneeling to unclip the dog's collar tag. They think we stepped too far. Titan pressed his nose into Caldwell's palm, breath warm against cold skin. The moment stretched. Two partners bound by silence, separated by rules. Later in the small house beyond the ridge, Caldwell sat alone at his kitchen table. The room smelled faintly of rain and metal. He looked at the empty collar resting beside his coffee mug. Justice, he thought, was supposed to be simple. But truth moved slower than paper, and decency rarely won on the first try. He exhaled long and steady. Justice doesn't always arrive quickly, he thought, but it has a way of finding the patient. Outside wind brushed through the pines. Somewhere beyond the courthouse walls, a lab technician in Jackson lifted a sealed evidence bag under fluorescent light. Inside, a single glove waited. Mud-dried fabric torn, carrying the answer no argument could twist. Morning broke clean and sharp over the Teton Range. Frost glazed the edges of every pine branch, and a pale line of sunlight cut through the clouds. At the Jackson Forensics Lab, the hum of machines filled the sterile air. A technician in a white coat leaned toward a monitor, eyes narrowing as numbers aligned on the screen. The results were unmistakable. DNA from the mud-stained glove matched Emmett Lowe. The trace was clear enough to confirm direct contact evidence that tied the child to the glove Kara Whitlow had worn. The technician exhaled and sealed the report in an envelope marked Priority, Cedar Ridge PD. By the time the courier reached the small station in Cedar Ridge, Officer Nate Caldwell was already there, standing at his desk, still under suspension, but unwilling to leave. Titan sat beside him, ears alert, waiting as if he understood this moment mattered. When the sergeant handed over the envelope, Caldwell read in silence, his eyes steady as the words sank in. "It's him," Hale said quietly from the doorway. "The boy's DNA. It's on the glove." Caldwell folded the report and placed it on the desk. His hands trembled once before he stilled them. "Then it's over," he said. "This time for real." Within hours, Kara Whitlow was taken into custody. She offered no words when they arrived at her door, only a blank stare as officers read the charge. Her expression flickered between disbelief and defiance, but no performance could hide the truth written in the evidence. Caldwell and Titan were reinstated before noon. The decision came swiftly, an acknowledgement from the department that integrity had outlasted doubt. As he clipped the polished badge back onto his chest, the officer felt a quiet steadiness return, a balance he hadn't realized he'd missed. Titan trotted beside him as they walked through the corridor toward the holding wing. The sound of their steps echoed in rhythm, two partners moving as one. When they reached the last door, Caldwell paused. Through the small glass window, Kara sat alone at a metal table. Her shoulders slumped, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She glanced up briefly as the officer appeared, then looked away. Caldwell didn't speak. He rested a hand on Titan's harness, signaling stillness. The dog's amber eyes fixed through the glass, unblinking, steady. For a moment, the air between them felt charged, not with anger, but with something colder, an understanding that cruelty had met its end. Titan's gaze didn't waver. The fluorescent light caught in his eyes, turning them into two small embers. Kara shifted in her seat, as if she could feel the weight of it. The silence said more than words ever could. Caldwell stood for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "Come on, partner." Titan turned away, steps sure tail low but calm. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and slow. The officer stopped on the station steps, looking toward the gray horizon. He thought of the boy of the flannel shirt, of the bronze charm that spoke of light. Justice had arrived, not loud or triumphant, but certain. Titan sat beside him, watching the drifting snow. The world felt quiet again, almost clean. Snow continued through the evening, falling in slow circles under the glow of the streetlights. The road to Caldwell's cabin wound through tall pines, their branches heavy with white. Inside the patrol SUV, the heater hummed softly. Emmett sat in the back seat, bundled in a thick jacket that dwarfed his small frame. Titan rested beside him, muzzle resting near the boy's knee. Every now and then the dog's tail brushed lightly against Emmett's leg, as if to remind him he wasn't alone. Caldwell glanced at them in the mirror. "It's not far now," he said quietly. "You'll be warm soon." The boy didn't answer, but his eyes followed the shifting headlights as they passed over the snow. When the car turned up a gravel path, the cabin came into view. A modest house tucked beneath two towering fir trees. Warm light glowed from the windows and smoke drifted from the chimney. Caldwell parked and opened the door. "Come on, buddy." He held out a hand. Titan leapt out first, landing with a muffled crunch in the snow. Emmett hesitated, then took Caldwell's hand and stepped into the cold. Inside the house was simple and neat. Wood floors, shelves lined with old books, and a large stone fireplace that filled the air with a scent of pine smoke. Caldwell hung their coats by the door and nodded toward the hearth. "You can sit by the fire. Titan will show you his spot." The German Shepherd padded across the room and returned carrying a worn green tennis ball between his teeth. He stopped in front of Emmett, dropped it, and looked up expectantly. Emmett blinked, unsure. "Is that for me?" Caldwell smiled faintly. "That's his way of saying welcome." Titan nudged the ball closer with his nose tail, sweeping the floor in slow rhythm. The boy picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The fabric was frayed, the color faded, but it carried the weight of something steady, a history of play and trust. For the first time in weeks, Emmett's lips lifted into a small smile. It came tentatively at first, then softened into something real. The sound that followed was light and fleeting, a short laugh that filled the quiet room. Caldwell froze, watching him. The moment was small, but it felt enormous. Titan barked once, a bright, playful sound that echoed the boy's laugh. They spent the next hour drying by the fire. Caldwell made cocoa on the stove, its sweetness curling through the air. Emmett sat on the rug, Titan's head resting on his lap, both watching the flames shift and crackle. The boy's shoulders had stopped trembling. The storm outside no longer seemed so close. When it was time for bed, Caldwell showed him the spare room. A simple space with fresh linens, a small lamp, and a stuffed bear waiting on the pillow. "You can keep the light on if you want," he said. Emmett nodded. "Will Titan stay?" "Right outside your door," Caldwell said. "He doesn't leave his post." The boy crawled into bed, the old flannel shirt folded beside him. Titan circled once, then settled by the doorway, eyes half closed but alert. Caldwell lingered a moment, taking in the quiet scene. The warmth, the firelight, the faint rhythm of steady breathing. It all felt like a promise kept. Outside, snow drifted past the window, soft and endless. Inside, a small world had begun to heal. The next morning arrived clear and still. Sunlight broke through the curtains, laying soft gold across the wooden floor. For the first time in weeks, Emmett woke without the sound of rain. He found Titan waiting by the door, tail tapping once against the floor when their eyes met. After breakfast, Caldwell drove them to Jackson, where the county had arranged counseling sessions. The ride was quiet. Snow sparkled along the ridges, and the boy watched the light flicker through the trees. Titan rode in the back, head tilted toward the window as if watching the same view. The clinic stood near the edge of town, a small building painted cream and green. Inside, it smelled faintly of coffee and lavender. Dr. Hannah Lee met them in the lobby. She was in her early 40s with kind eyes and a calm voice that seemed to soften every word she spoke. "Hi, Emmett," she said, kneeling to his height. "You can call me Hannah. I help kids find ways to make their thoughts a little quieter." Emmett looked down, unsure. Titan stepped closer, brushing his side lightly against the boy's hand. Hannah smiled. "And who's this gentleman?" "This is Titan," Caldwell answered. "He's part of the team." "Well, Titan can stay if Emmett wants," she said. "Sometimes breathing's easier with a friend." In the therapy room, the walls were covered with drawings, mountains, rivers, and animals made by other children. A small sand tray sat in one corner and soft chairs lined the other. Hannah set a small timer on the table. "We're going to practice something called 4-4-6 breathing," she said. "We breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, and breathe out for 6. It helps when your chest feels heavy." Emmett hesitated. "What if I forget?" Hannah's smile deepened. "Then Titan can remind you." The German Shepherd lifted his head at the sound of his name. Hannah raised her hand, motioning gently. "All right, Titan. Let's try together." She inhaled slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then held the breath, counting softly. When she began the exhale, Titan seemed to follow, chest expanding and then releasing in a long, slow sigh. The sound was so close to imitation that Emmett blinked in surprise. Caldwell, watching from the corner, felt a quiet laugh rise in his chest. Hannah's eyes softened. "Looks like he's already an expert." Emmett tried again, matching the rhythm. Inhale, hold, exhale. Titan's breathing matched his steady and calm. After a few rounds, the boy's shoulders loosened. His lips curved into a faint smile. "You're good at this," Hannah said. "And so is he." "Titan snores when he breathes out." Emmett whispered the words, almost playful. Hannah chuckled. "Then maybe he's teaching you patience." For the rest of the session, Emmett drew quietly. A house, a figure that looked like Titan, and a tall man in a police hat. When the timer chimed, Hannah glanced at Caldwell. "He's opening up. Slowly, but it's there." On the drive home, the boy leaned against Titan's shoulder, half asleep. The dog stayed still, eyes on the road ahead. Caldwell glanced in the mirror, taking in the sight, the warmth returning piece by piece. The light through the windshield caught the bronze charm at Emmett's collar. For a moment, it glowed faintly in the sun. Healing had begun not in words or promises, but in breath and quiet understanding. The night outside was still the kind of silence that came only after snow. Inside the small cabin, the fireplace burned low, throwing soft light across the walls. Caldwell sat at his desk with a stack of case files spread before him. Most were closed, routine reports and paperwork, but one folder at the bottom bore a familiar name, Julian Lowe. He hesitated before opening it. The file had been part of the department's old records retrieved from storage earlier that week when Child Services requested confirmation of Emmett's guardianship. Caldwell had kept it aside, unsure why. Now, with the boy asleep down the hall and Titan resting nearby, he unfolded the worn cover. Inside were a few documents, a medical report, a photograph of a man in his 30s standing beside a truck, smiling, sleeves rolled up, grease stains on his hands. Julian Lowe looked like someone who had known both hard work and peace. Behind the photo was a folded sheet of paper, creased and yellowed at the edges. Caldwell unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was rough but steady. At the top, dated a year before Julian's death, were the words, "For Emmett, when he's old enough to understand." The letter read, "My boy. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't come home. Life has its storms, and some we cannot outlast. But know this, you were never the storm. You were the light that guided me through it. If you lose your way, find the one who knows how to protect the light inside you. That light is your kindness, your courage, your heart. Trust it. It will lead you home." Caldwell sat back the paper, trembling slightly between his fingers. He glanced toward Titan, who lifted his head at the sound of rustling paper. The dog's amber eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. "Protect the light," Caldwell murmured. His gaze shifted toward the small bronze charm on the table beside him, the one they had found sewn into Emmett's shirt. The engraving was nearly identical. If you lose your way, find the one who carries the light. It wasn't coincidence. Julian must have commissioned the charm himself, perhaps even left it with someone he trusted. Caldwell looked again at the letter, then at Titan. The thought came slowly but landed with quiet certainty. Titan had been transferred to the Cedar Ridge unit only months after Julian's death. His adoption file listed an anonymous donor who had funded part of his training. Julian Caldwell whispered, "You planned this, didn't you?" Titan stood and moved closer, resting his head on Caldwell's knee. His weight was solid grounding. The officer exhaled, eyes softening. "He sent you to finish what he couldn't, to keep his boy safe." He folded the letter carefully, sliding it into a new envelope marked "For Emmett." Tomorrow, he would hand it to the court. It was more than evidence. It was a father's voice returning from silence. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees, carrying a sound like a breath drawn deep in the night. Inside, Titan's tail moved once slow and sure, as if affirming what both of them already knew: fate had its own way of bringing light where it was needed most. The courthouse in Jackson stood quiet under the morning light. Snow from the night before had already begun to melt, forming small rivulets that ran down the stone steps. Inside, the hallways buzzed with low voices. The case of State versus Kara Whitlow had drawn attention from nearly everyone in Cedar Ridge. Emmett did not attend the hearing. The court had ruled that the boy should remain in the care of child services until proceedings were over. But Caldwell was there, uniform, crisp folder in hand. Titan waited outside the courtroom under the supervision of a deputy, no longer part of official evidence, but still a presence that drew quiet glances from those who knew the story. Kara sat at the defense table, hands clasped, face pale under the fluorescent lights. Her lawyer, Clifford Brandt, leaned close, whispering last-minute reassurances. Across from them, the prosecutor organized her files, calm and steady. When the judge entered the room, settled into stillness. "This court is now in session," she announced. Brandt began first. "Your Honor," he said, "my client deeply regrets the misunderstanding that led to these charges. The child's fall was an accident. My client's history shows no pattern of violence, only grief and exhaustion." Kara nodded, faintly, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Her performance was careful, almost convincing. But Caldwell, watching from the witness stand, saw the same calculation in her eyes that he had seen on that rain-soaked street. The prosecutor rose. "The defense paints a picture of misfortune. The evidence tells another story." She turned to Caldwell. "Officer, please confirm your findings regarding the new evidence." Caldwell stood, the letter in hand. A glove recovered from the defendant's vehicle tested positive for the child's DNA. In addition, a letter was found in the personal effects of Julian Lowe, the child's father. He opened the envelope and unfolded the paper. The judge nodded. "You may read it into record." Caldwell's voice was steady, carrying across the quiet room. "If you lose your way, find the one who knows how to protect the light inside you." He looked up briefly. "Julian Lowe left this for his son Emmett. It confirms intent. A desire for his child's safety, for protection beyond his own life." Brandt objected, claiming sentiment had no place in evidence. The judge silenced him with a raised hand. "The document shows clear awareness of the child's vulnerability." "Continue." The prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor, Officer Caldwell and his K-9 partner Titan recovered this letter while following leads tied to the victim's care. Titan's trained search pattern led directly to the vehicle where the glove was hidden. Without him, the truth might have remained buried." A murmur passed through the courtroom. The judge nodded slightly. "Noted. This court recognizes Titan's role as part of the official investigative process." Kara's composure cracked. Her lawyer whispered urgently, but her face had gone rigid, eyes darting from the judge to Caldwell. When the verdict came, the gavel struck like the closing of a long winter. Kara Whitlow, the judge, said, "This court finds sufficient evidence of neglect and endangerment. You are sentenced to probation under state supervision. Custody of Emmett Lowe is permanently revoked." The courtroom exhaled as if released from a long breath. Caldwell lowered the letter, eyes soft but steady. Outside, through the tall windows, sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the floor. In the corridor beyond, Titan waited patiently, tail sweeping once across the tile when Caldwell appeared. The officer knelt, resting a hand on the dog's shoulder. "It's done, partner," he said quietly. "He's safe now." Titan leaned gently into him, eyes bright in the afternoon light, eyes that seemed to know justice had found its way at last. Weeks passed and winter began to fade from Cedar Ridge. The pines stood tall again, their branches free of snow, and the river at the edge of town murmured softly beneath the first touch of spring. The courthouse orders were signed, the final document stamped in quiet rooms. Emmett Lowe was no longer a child of uncertainty. He now had a guardian. Caldwell held the papers in his hand as he stepped out of the county office. The air was cool and clean, filled with the scent of pine sap and thawing earth. Titan walked beside him, leash, loose pace, unhurried. The moment didn't call for celebration. It called for stillness. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had dipped low behind the ridge. The windows glowed gold from the light of the fire inside. Emmett sat at the kitchen table, drawing with crayons, his tongue caught between his teeth in quiet concentration. He looked up when Caldwell entered. "Is it real now?" he asked. Caldwell smiled, setting the folder on the counter. "Yes, it's real. You're home for good." Emmett's eyes brightened, but the smile he gave was small, cautious, as if part of him still needed to believe it twice. Titan brushed past Caldwell, moving straight to the boy's side. The dog nudged his arm gently until Emmett dropped a crayon and laughed. That sound, light and unguarded, filled the room like a note of music that had waited too long to be played. Caldwell leaned against the doorframe, watching them. For the first time in months, he felt the world settle into something whole. Later that night, after dinner, the cabin quieted. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the faint hum of wind moved around the eaves. Emmett had fallen asleep quickly, the way children do when they feel safe. Caldwell stood at the doorway of the boys' room. Moonlight slipped through the window, spreading a pale silver glow across the bed. Emmett's breathing was soft and even, one hand resting on the stuffed bear that waited each night on his pillow. Beside the bed, Titan lay curled on the rug, his eyes half open, ears twitching at every sound beyond the walls. The German shepherd's presence filled the small space with quiet security. His steady breathing matched the rhythm of the boy's dreams. When Emmett stirred, Titan's tail brushed once against the floor. Reassurance without words. Caldwell pulled the blanket higher over the boy's shoulder, then crouched to rest a hand on Titan's neck. "You've done well," he whispered. Titan's eyes met his, calm and certain. Outside, the night deepened into stillness. The cabin stood alone beneath a sky crowded with stars. The faint crackle of the fire and the even breaths of those inside formed a kind of harmony, simple, steady, and sure. Caldwell lingered for a moment longer before turning off the hallway light. He paused at the window, watching the pines sway in the breeze. The weight that had followed him for months seemed to ease, replaced by a quiet conviction that healing like trust grew in silence. He looked once more toward the closed door where Titan kept his silent watch and smiled to himself. The boy was safe. The storm had passed. Spring arrived quietly in Cedar Ridge. The snow that had blanketed the mountains began to retreat, uncovering moss pine needles and the first scatter of wildflowers. Mornings carried the sound of running water from the thaw, and everyday light stayed a little longer on the horizon. For Emmett, the world was no longer a place of whispers and fear. He woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Titan's paws padding down the hallway. Most mornings began the same way, the boy sitting at the kitchen table with cereal, Titan waiting patiently beside him for a crust of toast, and Caldwell reading the daily bulletin from the sheriff's office. The cabin, once a shelter from storms, had become a home. Caldwell had returned to duty part-time, easing into patrol shifts while keeping his guardianship duties. Titan, now back in active service, split his time between training sessions and lazy afternoons in the yard. When the school bus arrived each morning, the dog would sit by the porch, head tilted, watching Emmett climb the steps. At school, the boy had begun to find his place again. Teachers noted his quiet focus and the faint smile that appeared when he spoke about Officer Caldwell and Titan. His drawings now filled the classroom walls, mountains, rivers, and always the figure of a German shepherd standing guard beneath the sky. Caldwell often stopped by the school after his shift, watching from a distance as Emmett ran with the other children during recess. The sight still stirred something deep in him, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief that the fragile boy from that rain-soaked night now ran freely under the sun. In the evenings, they followed small routines: dinner, a walk through the woods behind the house, and sometimes a movie while Titan lay stretched across the rug. The days began to feel ordinary, the kind of ordinary that people crave after too much chaos. Then one afternoon, a message arrived at the station. Caldwell was finishing reports when Sergeant Hale stepped into his office. His tone carried something measured, cautious. "There's been a development," he said. Caldwell looked up. "Go ahead." "Kara Whitlow's lawyer filed an appeal for reduced probation," Hale said. "The court approved early release under supervision. She's been transferred to a halfway facility outside Jackson." The words hung in the air, slow and heavy. Caldwell's pen stilled. "When?" "This morning." Hale hesitated. "I thought you should know before it hits local news." Caldwell leaned back in his chair, the memories of rain mud and a child's cry flashing behind his eyes. He exhaled slowly. "Does Emmett know?" "Not yet," Hale said. "And maybe it's better if he doesn't." That night the cabin felt quieter than usual. Emmett had fallen asleep early after a day at school, and Titan lay near the firehead, resting on his paws. Caldwell sat by the window watching the moon rise over the ridge. The peace that had settled so firmly now carried a thin edge of unease, like the first chill before another storm. Titan lifted his head, ear twitching as if he sensed the change in the air. Caldwell met his gaze. "We'll be ready," he said softly. The dog's tail moved once slow and deliberate. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, and far in the distance thunder rolled faintly beyond the mountains. Morning came bright and cold, the kind of day when the air felt sharp enough to wake even the sleepiest soul. Emmett's laughter echoed across the porch as he rushed down the steps toward the waiting school bus. Titan followed to the edge of the yard, tail swaying, his eyes alert as always. Caldwell stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching them both. The world seemed normal again. The mountains glowed pale in the sunlight, and the smell of thawing pine filled the air. But peace, Caldwell had learned, was fragile. By noon, he was back at the sheriff's office sorting reports when the call came from the school. "It's nothing urgent," the principal said. "A woman was seen near the parking lot earlier. She left before security could reach her. We're reviewing the camera footage." Caldwell's grip tightened on the phone. Description: tall. Brown coat. Dark hair pulled back. Mid-30s. He didn't need more. The same chill from the night before swept through him. "I'm on my way," he said. The drive to Cedar Ridge Elementary took 7 minutes. The wind had picked up scattering leaves across the road. When he arrived, students were just coming out for recess. Laughter and shouts filled the air, but his eyes scanned past them, searching. Titan stepped from the SUV, nose lifted, ears high. They moved quickly along the fence line. The German shepherd's body tensed, nostrils flaring. He turned sharply toward the west gate, toward the narrow strip of woods behind the playground. Caldwell followed his line of sight. Through the trees, a figure stood half hidden, watching the yard. "Stay," Caldwell murmured, then moved forward, voice firm. "Ma'am, this area is restricted." The woman froze her back to him. Then she turned, and the faint sunlight caught her face. Kara Whitlow. Her eyes darted toward the children beyond the fence, toward Emmett, who was kicking a soccer ball near the far end of the field. "I just wanted to see him," she said, her tone brittle, shaking. "I didn't mean harm." Caldwell kept his distance. "You're under supervision. You know the order." "I needed to tell him, I'm sorry," she whispered, "just once." Titan appeared at Caldwell's side, silent but commanding. The air between them changed. Kara's gaze flicked to the dog, and something in her expression faltered. She took a small step back. Don't, Caldwell warned quietly. At that moment, the ball Emmett had been chasing rolled toward the fence. He ran after it, laughing, unaware. Titan's ears snapped forward. He had caught the scent. The German Shepherd moved before Caldwell spoke, crossing the space in seconds. His body positioned between the fence and the woman, a living barrier. His low growl vibrated through the cold air. Kara stumbled back, her voice breaking. I wasn't enough, Caldwell said, stepping in. His tone left no room for movement. You're violating a court order. You need to leave now. Officers from the responding unit arrived moments later, escorting Kara away from the property. She didn't resist, but her eyes lingered on Emmett one last time before she turned. Across the playground, the children had stopped playing, sensing something had happened, though they didn't understand what. Emmett looked toward Caldwell, confusion in his small face. It's all right, Caldwell called. Go back to class. Titan stayed at his side, watching the departing cars until the last one disappeared down the hill. Then the dog sat, exhaling through his nose, calm once more. Caldwell knelt, resting a hand on his neck. You knew before anyone else, he said. You always do. Later that evening, as twilight painted the sky, Emmett hugged Titan tightly in the yard. The boy's small voice was steady. He keeps me safe, doesn't he? Caldwell nodded. Always. Titan lifted his head, eyes warm and bright, as if to seal the promise himself. The courthouse felt different this time. No whispers filled the hall, no tension pressed against the walls. Outside, spring sunlight poured through tall windows, bright and clear, touching the polished benches and the folded flags that framed the room. Cedar Ridge had come to witness not a trial, but a closure. A quiet celebration of what it endured. Judge Eleanor Briggs adjusted her glasses as she reviewed the final papers before her. Her voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had seen both the best and worst of people. This court, she began, recognizes the continued welfare and stability provided by Officer Nathaniel Caldwell. Based on evidence, conduct, and the child's well-being, permanent guardianship of Emmett Lowe is hereby granted to him. Emmett sat beside Caldwell at the front table, his hands folded in his lap. He didn't fully understand the weight of the words, but he felt their meaning. His eyes lifted to Caldwell's, and the man smiled softly. Titan sat behind them, tail resting against the polished floor, eyes focused on the judge. Judge Briggs set down her pen and looked toward the dog. It is also this court's acknowledgement, she said, her tone gentler now, that justice in this case would not have found its way without the instinct and courage of Canine Titan. The bailiff stepped forward, carrying a small velvet box. When he opened it, the light caught the glint of a silver medal engraved with the county seal and the words "Service, Loyalty, and Valor." The judge nodded. This is presented to Titan for bravery in the line of duty and for his protection of a child in need. The room filled with a quiet murmur of approval as Caldwell rose to accept the medal. He knelt beside Titan, who tilted his head, slightly curious about the object now gleaming in his handler's hands. Caldwell attached it to the dog's collar, the sound of metal against leather, soft but significant. Then Emmett stood small but sure and placed his hand gently on Titan's muzzle. "Good boy," he whispered, voice trembling a little. Titan leaned forward, resting his head against the boy's palm, eyes closing for a brief moment as if in answer. The judge smiled. "I believe that says it all." Applause followed, not loud or formal, but warm, rising from the townspeople who had gathered to watch the ending of a story that had once begun in the rain. Afterward, outside on the courthouse steps, sunlight washed over them. Reporters took a few photos before leaving, their words respectful quiet. Caldwell stood with Emmett beside him, the boy holding Titan's leash as if it were a thread tying the three of them together. "You did it," Emmett said softly, glancing up. Caldwell shook his head. "We did it." Titan gave a low huff tail, brushing against their legs. They walked down the steps together, the metal glinting in the sun with each movement. The crowd dispersed, and soon only the three of them remained. One man, one child, and one faithful guardian framed by the mountains that had watched every part of their story unfold. Caldwell looked toward the horizon, the same quiet peace returning to his chest. "Let's go home," he said. Titan barked once bright and brief as if agreeing. Emmett laughed, that sound now full and clear, a voice no longer afraid. The cabin beneath the pines felt brighter that evening, filled with the warmth of quiet joy. The fire crackled softly in the hearth while twilight stretched its pale blue fingers across the windows. Emmett sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a framed photograph resting on his lap. It was the picture Caldwell had found among Julian Lowe's things, a young man in a flannel shirt smiling at the camera with grease-stained hands and eyes full of gentle pride. The same eyes Caldwell thought that now looked out from the boy who carried his name. Emmett studied the photo in silence. Titan lay beside him, head resting on his paws, tail sweeping the floor in slow rhythm. Caldwell stood near the desk, watching but saying nothing. "I want to hang it in my room," Emmett said finally, lifting the picture. "He should be there." Caldwell nodded. "Let's find the right spot." Together they went down the short hall. The room had changed since that first night months ago. The walls now carried sketches from Emmett's art class. Mountains, pine trees, and a drawing of Titan with his medal glinting at the neck. On the small desk sat a stack of books, a lamp, and the bronze charm that had once been sewn inside his shirt. Caldwell handed him a small hook and a hammer. "Right here," Emmett nodded. Caldwell steadied the frame as the boy tapped gently. When it hung straight, Emmett stepped back. Beneath the photo on the wall shelf, he placed Titan's spare collar. The silver tag caught the light, engraved with neat letters, "You're home, kid." The boy traced the words with his fingertips. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the wind against the window. Then Emmett spoke, voice quiet but clear. "Now I have two protectors," he said. "Dad's up there." He pointed to the picture, "and Titan's down here." Titan lifted his head at his name ears, twitching eyes warm. The boy reached down to scratch the fur between them. "He listens, you know," he added, "like he understands." Caldwell smiled. "I think he does." Emmett looked back at the photo. "Dad would have liked him." "I think he already does," Caldwell said softly. The boy turned to him. "Can I keep the collar here forever?" "As long as you want," Caldwell answered. Emmett's smile came slow but steady. He climbed into bed, the flannel shirt folded by his pillow as always. Titan settled at his usual place beside the rug tail, curling against his paws. Caldwell stood in the doorway, hand on the frame of the door. The firelight flickered down the hall, painting the picture of Julian Lowe in a golden glow. Beneath it, the collar gleamed faintly. Two symbols of love, one from the past, one alive and breathing just a few feet away. Caldwell turned off the lamp. In the hush that followed, the rhythm of sleep and the soft breath of the dog blended into the steady pulse of peace. He looked once more toward the photo and smiled. "He's home now," he whispered. Spring settled fully over Cedar Ridge, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and pine sap. The town square, usually quiet on a Saturday, had been transformed into something brighter. Banners hung between lamp posts and tables lined the park's edge with coffee, cookies, and small flags. In the center, a sign read in bold letters, "K9 Titan Day, celebrating service and heart." Caldwell stood beside the stage, his uniform neat but relaxed. Titan sat proudly at his side, the silver medal from the court ceremony glinting in the sun. Around them, children gathered in small circles, whispering and pointing. Emmett sat at the front of the crowd, legs crossed, his flannel shirt neatly tucked in. The mayor, a tall man with a sun-weathered face, stepped to the microphone. "Today," he said, "we honor a guardian who reminds us that courage often walks on four legs. Titan and Officer Caldwell showed us that loyalty can change a life and save one." Applause rippled through the park. Titan's ears flicked at the sound, but he stayed composed, gaze steady on Caldwell. When the speeches ended, the children were invited to meet the guest of honor. Titan became the center of a circle of small hands and delighted laughter. He accepted every pat with calm patience, tail sweeping gently through the grass. Emmett laughed too, introducing him as though he were telling a secret. "This is Titan," he said proudly. "He's my best friend. He helps people find the way home." A reporter nearby crouched down, smiling. "Is that true?" she asked softly. Emmett nodded. "He found me when I was lost." Caldwell felt something tighten and ease in his chest all at once. Titan turned his head at that moment, looking straight at Emmett with a quietness that seemed almost human. The day unfolded easily. Music from a local band, chatter from old neighbors, the smell of cinnamon bread drifting from a nearby booth. For the first time, the story of Cedar Ridge wasn't about tragedy. It was about what had survived it. As the afternoon waned, clouds gathered along the mountain ridge. Families began to pack up, laughter trailing into the soft wind. Caldwell had just turned to speak with the mayor when a woman shouted from the edge of the park, voice strained with panic, "My daughter, she's gone. She was here a second ago." Caldwell's training kicked in before words could form. "Titan," he said. The dog lifted his head immediately, eyes sharpening. "Clothing color?" Caldwell asked. "Pink jacket, 6 years old," the mother cried. Titan began to move, nose low, weaving through the fading crowd. The trail led beyond the tables and across the open field toward the tree line. Caldwell followed, radio already at his shoulder. Emmett ran a few steps behind, heart pounding. Near the far fence, Titan paused, then bolted toward a cluster of bushes. A moment later, a small cry rose from behind them. Caldwell reached the spot to find Titan sitting beside a frightened little girl, her pink jacket caught on a branch. He crouched, freeing her sleeve. "You're safe," he said gently. Titan wagged his tail once, brushing against the child's hand as if to prove it. The mother arrived moments later, tears spilling down her face. "Thank you. Thank you." She kept repeating, her arms wrapping around the girl. Caldwell looked down at his partner, pride settling deep in his chest. "Good work," he said softly. Titan blinked up at him, calm as if to say, "Just doing my job." When they returned to the square, the townspeople broke into applause again. Emmett stood at the front, his smile bright and sure. Later, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the park emptied, leaving behind echoes of laughter and the shimmer of late light across Titan's metal. Caldwell glanced at Emmett, who leaned against Titan's shoulder. "Looks like he saved another one," he said. Emmett nodded. "It's what he does." The officer smiled. "It's what we all do, if we listen to the light." Dawn broke gently over Cedar Ridge. The first sunlight spilled down from the mountain peaks, turning the last patches of snow into rivulets of silver that ran through the pine roots. Birds stirred in the branches above the cabin, and the smell of wet earth and wood smoke hung in the air. Inside, the soft crackle of the fire blended with the steady rhythm of breathing, the sound of a house at peace. Caldwell stood by the kitchen window, mug in hand, watching as the day began to unfold. The glass had fogged faintly from the warmth inside, but beyond it, he could see Titan already awake, stretching in the yard, his coat shining in the golden light. Moments later, the bedroom door creaked open, and Emmett's small footsteps padded down the hall. "Morning," Caldwell said, not turning yet. "Morning," the boy answered, voice still rough from sleep. He rubbed his eyes, then grinned when he saw the open door leading outside. "Can I go?" "Go on," Caldwell said with a smile. "He's waiting." Emmett darted out the door, swinging wide behind him. The cold morning air met his laughter as he ran across the yard. Titan bounded to meet him, the two moving as if they'd been waiting for that moment all winter. The boy's boots kicked up melting snow, and Titan barked once, a sound sharp and bright, before circling him playfully. Caldwell leaned on the doorway, watching. There was something almost sacred about it. The simplicity of it, the sunlight breaking through the trees, the way the child and the dog moved together, as though they belonged to the same pulse of the earth. He turned back to the table where his open notebook waited. He flipped to the last page and began to write the final lines of his report, the one that had followed him since that stormy night nearly a year ago. Case closed, but life restored. He paused, tapping his pen against the paper. It wasn't official language, but it was the truth. Some stories didn't end with paperwork. They ended with healing. A gust of wind brushed through the open window, carrying laughter from the yard. Emmett had fallen into the grass, Titan beside him, their silhouettes framed in gold. Caldwell smiled and set the pen down. He stepped outside, boots Sinking softly into the damp earth, the mountain air was crisp and clean. Titan looked up as he approached, ears twitching, eyes calm. Caldwell crouched beside him, scratching the fur behind his neck. "You've done your duty," he murmured, "more than any of us could ask." Titan's tail swept once slow and content. Emmett reached up, looping his small arms around the dog's neck. "He's my hero," he said. Caldwell met his gaze, voice quiet. "He's mine too." The morning stretched long and bright. The snow had melted into the soil, and the scent of new pine filled the air. Titan settled near the porch front paws, crossed eyes turned toward the open sky. Caldwell watched him for a while, memorizing the stillness, the way the sun caught in his fur, the steady rise and fall of his breath. And in that silence, it was clear what remained. Miracles don't arrive with thunder, he thought. They live in the quiet breath of faithful hearts. Titan blinked once, his gaze tracing the blue above the ridge where light never faded. The day was new, the world whole again. And for the first time in a long while, everything was exactly as it should be. The story of Titan, Emmett, and Caldwell is more than a tale of rescue and redemption. It is a quiet reminder of the bond that exists between humans and the animals who walk beside them. The German Shepherd, long known for its courage and loyalty, embodies the best of what we hope to be: steadfast, compassionate, and willing to protect without hesitation. Titan's presence throughout this journey was not simply that of a guardian. He was the bridge between pain and healing, fear and trust, despair and renewal. In every town, in every home, there are animals who give us this same kind of grace. They ask for little yet offer everything: companionship, patience, and a love that doesn't falter when life grows difficult. Through Titan's eyes, we see that kindness is not weakness, and that courage often begins in silence: a steady breath, a comforting nudge, a loyal heart that stays through the storm. The people of Cedar Ridge found peace not through grand victories, but through compassion. Caldwell's steady faith in goodness, Emmett's bravery in learning to trust again, and Titan's unwavering devotion created a circle of light that reached beyond their small mountain town. May this story remind us all that miracles are not distant or rare. They live in every act of care, in every bond formed between person and animal, in every choice to protect rather than harm. To love a creature like Titan is to understand the quiet strength of loyalty, and to see that sometimes the greatest light comes from those who never speak a word, yet teach us how to be better every single day.